Last week, I had something truly infuriating happen, and that has inspired me to talk about the harsh truth about the acting industry. This is not to put anybody off becoming a part of this industry. It's just sort of a warning label for those thinking about it. For context, I had an audition come in Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. It was just a commercial tape, not too long, but apparently it was a huge rush. So I had to get it done by that night, or by, if I couldn't do that, 12 p.m. the next day, which is not even a 24-hour turnaround. Fab, great. I was already in full hermit mode. I'd been caught in the rain that day. My hair looked like a bird's nest. I had no face on, no eyebrows because I'm getting lazy with my tinting. In my pajama shirt, the last thing I wanted to do was tape. But we decided, me and my agent, that it was best to get it in fast because I fit the brief and they were filming next week. So 90 minutes later, I had straightened and curled my hair because I was supposed to look elegant and professional. Done the tape, edited the tape, uploaded the tape, sent it on its way. 90 minutes from when I received that brief. And then what happens? Nothing. No download receipt. I then sent a backup email the next day because it wasn't downloaded by the end of the day and it was urgent. No response to that. Another day later, I got my agent to check. They didn't respond to him. He called. They didn't respond at all. They didn't pick up the phone. And at this point, my blood is boiling. This industry is already difficult enough as it is, but being asked to do a last-minute tape, which is not a small ask when you're supposed to look elegant and professional, and I never look that way, only for them to not even download or watch the tape just feels a little bit insulting. And most of the time in this industry, you don't actually get responses to auditions or tapes. That is totally normal. I, for voiceover, send out about 8,500 auditions a year, 8,400. And of the jobs that I don't book, I can count on two hands the number of times someone said, "Thanks for auditioning, but we went in another direction." Most of the time, they just don't say anything. And in terms of on-camera stuff, I've barely ever received a thanks but no thanks until I'm down to the final few and there's been a back and forth for a while. So this whole experience brought me back to something I've heard a few acting coaches say over the years, which is only be an actor if you can't do anything else. And that sounds grim and it sounds a bit mean, but it's 1,000% true. They don't mean it in a mean way. What they are saying is, if there's anything else that you like doing as much as performing, do that instead because it's going to be easier. So if you like performing, but you also really just love teaching, go do that because it'll be much more enjoyable for you. There are some people who start out and just get lucky and start working, but that is not what happens for most people. So if the acting industry is something you are considering, this is the warning label that nobody seems to talk about. In terms of actual employment, in the acting industry, unemployment rates hover at around 90%, and only 2% of actors are able to actually make a living out of acting. So if we compare that to something else, say we look at a more standard profession, law, I have a law degree, only 5% of law grads in the UK are unemployed 15 months after graduating. It's almost the opposite in terms of percentages. As an actor or a voice actor, you have to do a ton of auditions before hopefully booking a role. And if that sounds easy, if you think, I can do auditions, here's the catch. You actually have to find those auditions. And these days, getting an agent to pay attention to you can be nearly impossible, even if you are approaching them with a body of work. It does not make sense to me why acting agents or managers pick up certain people over others, because I used to think it was more to do with what they could sell or what they think they could sell. But I know from experience now, even people that are working that have tried to get other reps, so they are sellable, will not be taken on by majority of agents. Personally, I knew going into the acting industry, I'd have to do a ton of auditions before booking work. I understood that. But I've been told what every other actor gets told when they're training. You just have to train, find an agent or a manager, first in the USA, and then you start auditioning. Once casting directors start to know you and your work, you'll start booking commercials, you'll start doing commercial roles. Then you'll move up, you'll start getting those bit parts, the one-liners, the two-liners. Then you might get a guest in an episode. There's a linear progression. And they make it sound as if it's easy and linear. If you go to a top drama school, there's a high likelihood you'll be picked up by an agent. That does not mean they won't drop you in the first year when you don't book any work. It also doesn't actually guarantee you auditions. What it does mean is that you'll likely be in a ton of debt for a career path that, for the most part, won't earn you a lot of money, especially right out of the gate. There are people that earn lots of money from it, but usually it takes a while to build that up. Now, if you don't go to a top drama school, you might be lucky enough to get picked up by a low to mid-tier agent, but they often don't have access to the higher level briefs and the bigger roles that all of us budding actors want to audition for. And that's if you can even get them to look at your material and agree to represent you in the first place. You also have to take market dynamics into account. For example, if you're like me, 20s to 30s, ambiguously aged female, there's not a lot of roles out there, and there are a lot of people fighting for those roles. I used to do a lot of in-person workshops with casting directors and casting associates because, you've got to find a way to be seen and start to get on their radar. So, pay to play. And what I noticed was, I'd been to, a whole handful of them, and I said to my partner, do you realize that in every single one of these workshops, 90% of the people here are 20s to 30s ambiguously aged females, and then there's 10% males across the entire age spectrum? It quickly became very evident why the men I know seem to be booking a lot more than the women I know, because there's just a ton more women and less roles. And if you don't have a very distinct look, it may also be more difficult for you to get started. There are a couple of people I know who bounce from show to show. You wouldn't consider them A-listers, but they're working. They have very, very distinct looks and tend to play the exact same character type, but you often need that character type. And if you've got someone that just naturally embodies that, they are going to work. Versus somebody who has a more versatile look that you could put them there, or you could put them there, or you could put them there, but they don't entirely fit one of those categories very stereotypically. When you manage to land an agent, that also doesn't guarantee you auditions. There are thousands of people being submitted for every single role. I know someone who booked a recurring role in a cable TV show. There were 1,500 people submitted by their agents. So that's when their headshot pops up and the casting team decides if they want to have them audition for 3 roles. Of those 1,500 people, 50 people were asked to audition and only 3 people booked the roles. And this person had also auditioned for that casting team numerous times before, same show, different roles, so they were already familiar with their work. When you do manage to start auditioning consistently, it becomes a little bit like a slot machine. You got a huge bucket of coins, and one by one, you put them into the slot and you press the button. And depending on the machine you're playing on, you could win 1 in 5,000 times or 1 in 34 million times. There's seemingly no logic to it. Sometimes you'll think, I am a shoo-in for this role. This is bang on right. Nothing. Other times you'll think, why am I being called in for this? And you'll book it. To some extent, it does depend on your skill, but that's why I'm calling it a slot machine, because sometimes there's all these other factors that go into it that you'll likely never know about. Things like, oh, she was wearing a blue shirt and the competitor's brand color is red, we can't hire her. Or, she's a bit too tall, she'll be taller than our leading man. Or, she looks like my ex, not a fan. She's a bit too young, she's a bit too old, she's a bit too... You get it. All of those things. And you don't actually get paid for any of these auditions. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a recall fee for a callback, but usually it's a pretty insignificant amount of money. So you might end up spending 10 hours a week on auditions, none of which you get paid for. Then when you do book these small roles when you're starting out, they often don't pay that well, given the time you've had to put in to get them. So £3,000 a day sounds like a great rate, but you might get 1 day of that. And if we do the math, say it takes an average actor 1 in 68 auditions, is what I think I heard Bryce Dallas Howard say. 1 in 68. On the conservative side, if those auditions take 2 hours each, that's what? 136 hours. And then if the day on set is another 12 hours, that's 148 hours. That ends up being about £20 an hour. If you manage to book a job in those 68 auditions and it pays that rate. If it pays less than that, the math is not mathing. Next hurdle you come across is then when you start working and you've beaten the whole 1 in 68 thing, doesn't mean you're going to continue to work. I know people that have had recurring roles on huge shows, and they were told by various industry people, oh, this is going to be your launch pad, it's going to be great for your career. And now they're back on the bench auditioning and not working all that much. You'll also likely have to start on ultra low budget productions to get your feet wet. The first film I did in the UK still haunts my dreams. It was the middle of winter in the UK, which for an Aussie was bloody cold. This was my first time living in a place this cold. And it was a horror film. So we were shooting mainly night shoots in the middle of the night, in the middle of winter, in a forest. I was there for it. I was keen as a bean. First night we got there, get on set, started relatively late because I remember it being dark. And the guy that they'd hired to do the monologue, which basically set up the whole film, we needed this story, could not remember his lines at all, couldn't get through it. And unfortunately for him, the more he kept forgetting them, the worse it got because he was getting in his head. But we sat there, there was me and one other guy from the main cast. There were 5 in the main cast, but we were the only 2 there because we were listening to this story. And we were sitting there, we were just listening. At first they tried to get him to do paragraphs, just a couple of sentences at a time. Couldn't manage to do that. It got to the point where the director was saying, okay, I'm gonna say 1 sentence at a time and you just repeat it back after me. Couldn't manage that. He also had to step back at one point and point to something and he couldn't, it wasn't clicking for him. So it gets to about 3 in the morning. We call it quits. And we were trying to shoot 90 minutes, a 90-minute film in 7 days, which for context, even if you're rushing a 90-minute film on a bigger scale production, you're still gonna need at least 90 days usually for that. So we were doing that in 7 days. So we'd lost our first night because we couldn't use any of that. They had to recast, which meant we were now shooting a 90-minute film in 6 days. Next day, the rest of the main cast show up and we start churning through it. We're talking 16, 18 plus hour days we are filming for, mainly at nights. I was delirious. Breakfast was 2 pieces of white bread and a sausage. Lunch was 2 pieces of white bread and a piece of ham. Dinner was white pasta with tomato sauce and sometimes an onion. This is way too much information. I did not poop for 4 days. And as somebody who is a very regular excreter, I was not happy. I also really wasn't sleeping. This has never happened to me before. It got to the 5th night. We were coming up on, I think this was a 21-hour day I pulled. We were coming up right at the end of it. It's about 9 in the morning. The sun's just starting to come out. We are in the middle of a mud sludge puddle. I'm wearing a tank top and thin leggings because it is the end of the horror where, you've run away from everything and I don't know why you don't have clothes left, but that's just what horror is. And we were doing the final close-ups and my scene partner went and he just lost his lines, couldn't remember any of them. I start laugh crying, the hysterical laugh crying where I didn't know if I was laughing or crying. I couldn't stop. This made it into the film because I just couldn't stop. And then when it got to me, my brain stopped. I knew these lines inside out, back to front. I had done nothing but learn these lines because I got to the UK in COVID, so I had time. No, I knew them and they were gone. I could not remember a single word that had to come out of my mouth. And we get back to 9 a.m., we get back to base and they go, okay, can you be ready by 12? And for context, we had to do our own hair and makeup. So what that meant was go to bed, probably by 9:30, get up at 11, an hour and a half later, and get ready for another day. And I looked at them and I said, no. And I walked away. I couldn't, I was broken. Point being, if that is not something that you think you could handle, that is a bit extreme. Most film sets will not push you to those lengths, even indie films. That was something I don't think I could ever do again. But if you are not willing to be able to put yourself in those situations, this may not be the industry for you, because making films can be an intense process, even when you are on the bigger film sets. All this to say, this industry is hard. It is certainly not impossible, but if it's something you want to do, you're going to need to have some business savvy about you, as well as talent to find a way to get your foot in the door. If you are someone who just wants to be famous, I don't think this is the career path for you. I'd put some time into building social media, focusing on something more like that. If you're someone who likes consistency and you want to have holidays and time off and weekends, this probably isn't the industry for you either. If you're wondering, if you think, oh, I've always loved doing voices, or I've always loved, being in a theatre show, maybe I should give it a go, probably isn't the industry for you. You need to have an almost stupid obsession with the craft and storytelling for it to be worth it. And you need to be willing to stick it out for a long time to start seeing the results. So on that grim note, I hope I haven't turned too many people off the acting industry. I just wanted to give you a look into what you may come across if this is the path you choose to take. I have a lot of people saying to me, especially in terms of voiceover, oh, I've always been good at voices. I think this is something I should give a go. And after hearing this rundown, they think, yeah, I don't think I want to do it that much. One thing I will say is that if you do want to get into the acting industry, it really helps to have a business background, because so much of this industry is networking, marketing, trying to get yourself out there. It's not just about being good. There are many people that I've met who are really, really talented, and they've packed in the towel because it was taking too long, or they weren't getting anywhere, they weren't seeing the results they wanted to see, and they wanted to have consistent income, buy a house, have a family, which is totally understandable. So if you do want to get into this industry, I highly recommend having some sort of almost business plan or approach to it. I built out the voiceover side of things because I knew I was bookable in terms of commercial work. So I thought, let's get more voiceover work in that sphere, because then I've got the money to have a life and continue pushing for the acting. I really hope this video has been useful to some people, or maybe just made some of you feel like, you're not alone. We're all going through this weird stuff. But if you can stick it out and you really, really love this industry, love making movies, you can make something of this. It just might take a while. So if there's any other questions you've got about acting, or you want more random stories about horror films that I've done, let me know in the comments.